The blood-stained letter trembled in Catherine Turner's hands as the stagecoach rattled westward through the unforgiving terrain of the New Mexico Territory in 1875. Banished from Boston by her own father for a scandal she hadn't caused, the 20-year-old woman could barely see the dusty landscape through her tears. The letter, penned in her father's severe hand, contained her sentence: to serve as housekeeper for her father's business associate, Mr. Jameson, at his remote ranch, a punishment designed to remove her from society until her indiscretions were forgotten. Last stop before Cimarron. The driver called out as the stagecoach jolted to a halt at a small trading post. Catherine dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief and straightened her posture. She refused to show weakness, even as her entire world had been torn from her. Boston society had been quick to condemn her after she'd been found alone with Jonathan Blackwell, her father's junior business partner, in her father's study during a party. Jonathan had cornered her, his intentions dishonorable, but it was her reputation that suffered when they were discovered. Jonathan had fabricated a story claiming she had lured him there, and her father, always more concerned with appearances than truth, had believed him over his own daughter. The stagecoach door swung open, revealing a sun-scorched landscape so different from the manicured gardens of Boston that Catherine felt her breath catch. "Miss Turner," a gruff voice called out, "you coming down or planning to ride all the way to California?" Catherine gathered her skirts and stepped carefully from the stagecoach. The heat hit her immediately, dry and oppressive, so unlike the cool Atlantic breezes she was accustomed to. "Mr. Jameson sent word you'd be arriving today," the trading post owner said, looking her up and down with undisguised skepticism. "He said someone would collect you this afternoon." Catherine nodded stiffly, her throat tight. "Thank you, I shall wait inside if I may." The trading post was a simple affair, wooden shelves lined with canned goods, sacks of flour, tools, and various sundries needed for frontier living. Catherine sat primly on a rough-hewn bench, her small valise clutched in her lap. Her trunks, containing the few possessions her father had allowed her to bring, were stacked outside. Hours passed. Catherine watched the sun's progress across the sky through the dusty window, anxiety building with each passing minute. What if no one came? What if Mr. Jameson had changed his mind and she was stranded here, alone in this unforgiving wilderness? Just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the sound of hoofbeats approached. Catherine rose, smoothing her travel-worn skirt, and peered through the window. A lone rider appeared, silhouetted against the setting sun. He rode tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and confident. As he dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, Catherine caught her first clear glimpse of him, not the older, portly businessman she had expected, but a man perhaps in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and a strong jawline partially obscured by several days' worth of stubble. The trading post door swung open and the man entered, removing his hat to reveal dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. His eyes, a piercing blue that stood out against his tanned skin, scanned the room before settling on Catherine. "Miss Turner?" he asked, his voice deep but gentle. Catherine nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to speak. "I'm Hunter Lawson," he said, approaching with his hat held respectfully in his hands. "Foreman of the Rocking J. Mr. Jameson sent me to collect you." "Where is Mr. Jameson?" Catherine managed to ask, her voice small but steady. A shadow crossed Hunter's face. "I'm afraid Mr. Jameson passed away 3 weeks ago, madam. Pneumonia took him quick." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. "Then why am I here if Mr. Jameson is dead? His son Ethan runs the ranch now," Hunter explained. "He received your father's letter after Mr. Jameson's passing and decided to honor the arrangement. The ranch needs a housekeeper, and Ethan figured you might need a place to stay." Catherine's mind raced. She was to be a housekeeper for a man she'd never met, in a place she'd never been, with no way to return home. Not that Boston was home anymore, her father had made that abundantly clear. "My trunks are outside," she said finally, gathering her resolve. She was here now, and she would make the best of it. She had no other choice. Hunter nodded, his eyes studying her face. Something in his expression shifted, a softening, perhaps recognition of the fear she was trying so hard to hide. "I'll load them in the wagon," he said. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch. We should get moving if we want to arrive before dark." Catherine followed him outside, where a simple wagon waited beside his horse. As Hunter easily lifted her heavy trunks into the wagon bed, Catherine noticed the fluid strength in his movements, so different from the pampered businessmen she was accustomed to in Boston. "Have you worked for the Jamesons long, Mr. Lawson?" she asked as he helped her up onto the wagon seat. "Since I was 16, he replied, untying his horse and securing it to the back of the wagon. "Started as a ranch hand, worked my way up. Mr. Jameson was a good man, taught me everything I know about ranching." As Hunter climbed up beside her and took the reins, Catherine found herself studying his profile. His features were strong but not harsh, weathered by the elements but still youthful. His hands, gripping the reins with casual confidence, bore the calluses and small scars of honest labor. The wagon lurched forward and Catherine instinctively reached for support, her hand briefly touching Hunter's arm before she quickly withdrew it. "Sorry about that," Hunter said with a small smile. "These trails aren't as smooth as city streets." The wagon rolled away from the trading post, and Catherine watched as the last vestige of civilization receded behind them. Ahead lay nothing but open country, vast, wild, and unknown. "It's beautiful," she found herself saying as they crested a small rise, revealing a sweeping vista of golden grasslands stretching toward distant purple mountains. Hunter glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Most city folk don't see it that way at first." "I'm not most city folk," Catherine replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Hunter's lips curved into a smile that transformed his face, making him appear younger, more approachable. "No, Miss Turner, I don't believe you are." As the wagon trundled along the rutted trail, Catherine felt something unexpected, a small flutter of possibility. Perhaps this punishment wouldn't be quite what her father had intended. Perhaps in this vast, untamed country, she might find something she hadn't even known she was seeking. Hunter stole glances at the woman beside him as he guided the wagon through the familiar terrain. When Ethan Jameson had told him to collect the new housekeeper from Boston, he'd expected a stern, matronly woman, not this slender young woman with intelligent green eyes and auburn hair escaping from its pins after the long journey. He'd overheard enough at the trading post to piece together that she wasn't here by choice. The folks from the East sometimes sent troublesome daughters west as a form of punishment, removing them from polite society until scandals blew over or suitable marriages could be arranged. Hunter had seen it before, but something about Catherine Turner struck him differently. There was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself, despite her obvious exhaustion and the faint traces of tears he'd noticed when he first saw her. And when she'd looked out at the land, his land, in spirit if not in deed, and called it beautiful, something had shifted inside him. "The ranch is just beyond that ridge," Hunter said, pointing ahead. "You can see the lights starting to come on now that the sun's setting." Catherine leaned forward slightly, straining to see. The wagon hit a particularly deep rut, and Hunter instinctively reached out to steady her, his hand catching her elbow. Their eyes met briefly before Catherine looked away, a flush coloring her cheeks. "Thank you," she murmured. "Just doing my job, Miss Turner," Hunter replied, though he knew that wasn't entirely true. Something about this woman made him want to protect her, though she didn't strike him as someone who would appreciate being treated as helpless. As they approached the ranch, Hunter watched Catherine's expression. The rocking J wasn't the largest spread in the territory, but it was substantial, a main house built of sturdy logs and stone, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, a large barn, corrals, and outbuildings, all surrounded by fenced pastures where cattle grazed. In the distance, the mountains rose up against the darkening sky. "It's larger than I expected," Catherine said. "The old man, Mr. Jameson, that is built it up from nothing," Hunter explained with pride. "Started with just 100 acres and a dozen head of cattle. Now we run close to 2,000 head on 20,000 acres. The wagon rolled into the yard, and several ranch hands emerged from the bunkhouse, curious about the new arrival. Hunter felt a sudden protectiveness as their gazes settled on Catherine. "Evening, boss," called out one of the men, a weathered cowboy named Frank. "This the new housekeeper." "This is Miss Catherine Turner," Hunter confirmed, jumping down from the wagon and coming around to help Catherine descend. "Miss Turner, these are some of our hands, Frank, Pete, and Caleb." The men touched their hats respectfully, though their curious stares remained. Catherine acknowledged them with a polite nod, her posture straight as a ramrod despite her obvious fatigue. "Where's Ethan?" Hunter asked, looking toward the main house. "Rode out to check the north pasture," Frank replied. "Said he might not be back till morning." Hunter frowned slightly. He had expected Ethan to be present to welcome Catherine and explain her duties. Now that responsibility would fall to him. "Let's get you settled then," Hunter said to Catherine. "I'll show you to your quarters and have the boys bring in your trunks." Catherine followed him to the main house, a two-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Inside, the main room was dominated by a large stone fireplace, with sturdy, well-crafted furniture arranged throughout. It was simple but comfortable, clearly built for practicality rather than show. "The kitchen's through there," Hunter said, gesturing toward a doorway. "Mr. Jameson's, that is, Ethan's study is there. Bedrooms are upstairs." He led her up the wooden staircase to a small but clean room at the back of the house. It contained a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a small desk, and a window overlooking the mountains. "This will be your room," Hunter explained. "It's not fancy, but it's private. The washroom is at the end of the hall. You'll be expected to cook for Ethan and keep the house in order. During roundup or when we have extra hands, you'll cook for them too, but mostly they eat at the bunkhouse." Catherine stood in the center of the room, taking it all in. Hunter couldn't read her expression. Was she dismayed by the simplicity, horrified at the thought of manual labor? But when she turned to him, her chin was lifted in determination. "I should tell you, Mr. Lawson, that I have never been a housekeeper before. I can cook simple meals, but nothing elaborate. I will do my best to learn quickly." Her honesty surprised him. "I figured as much," he admitted. "Most Boston ladies don't come west knowing how to cook on a wood stove or scrub floors." "I am not most Boston ladies," she repeated her earlier assertion, this time with a hint of defiance. Hunter found himself smiling again. "No, Miss Turner, you certainly are not." Just then, they heard the front door open and heavy footsteps below. "That'll be Mrs. Wilkins," Hunter explained. "She's the widow from town who's been cooking for us since Mr. Jameson fell ill. Ethan arranged for her to stay a few days to show you the ropes." Relief flickered across Catherine's face, quickly replaced by determination. "I would appreciate her guidance." The sound of someone clearing their throat came from the doorway. Mrs. Wilkins, a stout woman in her 50s with gray streaked hair pulled into a severe bun, stood there eyeing them suspiciously. "This is her, then?" she asked Hunter, looking Catherine up and down with obvious skepticism. "Yes, this is Miss Turner," Hunter confirmed. "Miss Turner, Mrs. Wilkins." Mrs. Wilkins made a sound that might have been acknowledgement or disapproval. "Supper's nearly ready. I'll expect you in the kitchen after you've freshened up, miss. Might as well start learning tonight." With that, she turned and headed back downstairs. "Don't mind her," Hunter said softly. "She's just protective of the ranch, has been cooking here off and on for years." Catherine nodded, squaring her shoulders. "I understand. It's difficult to have a stranger come into your domain." "I'll have the boys bring up your trunks and leave you to settle in," Hunter said, suddenly aware that they were alone in her bedroom. "Supper's usually at 6. As he turned to leave, Catherine called after him. "Mr. Lawson," he paused in the doorway. "Yes, Miss Turner." "Thank you for your kindness today." Something in her voice, vulnerability beneath strength, touched him deeply. "Just doing my job, miss," he repeated, though they both knew it wasn't true. As Hunter descended the stairs, he tried to make sense of the unexpected feelings stirring within him. Catherine Turner had been sent west as punishment, but as he'd helped her down from that wagon and seen her face in the golden light of sunset, something had whispered in his heart that she wasn't a burden to be borne, but a blessing he hadn't known to ask for. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with sunlight streaming through the small window of Catherine's room. She had slept surprisingly well, exhausted from the long journey and the emotional toll of the past weeks. The bed, though narrow and simpler than she was accustomed to, had proven comfortable, and the absolute silence of the ranch at night, so different from the constant sounds of Boston, had lulled her into dreamless sleep. Catherine rose and dressed quickly in one of her plainer dresses, pinning her hair in a simple style that would stay neat through a day of work. The previous evening, after a simple but hearty supper of beef stew and fresh bread, Mrs. Wilkins had outlined her expected duties and given her a brisk tour of the kitchen. The older woman hadn't been particularly warm, but she had been thorough, and Catherine appreciated that more than false kindness. Ethan Jameson had not returned, so Catherine had yet to meet her new employer. Hunter had excused himself after supper, returning to the bunkhouse where he evidently had quarters separate from the other hands, befitting his position as foreman. Catherine made her way downstairs to find Mrs. Wilkins already at work in the kitchen, a fire blazing in the wood stove and the smell of coffee filling the air. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilkins," Catherine greeted her. The older woman looked up from the biscuit dough she was kneading. "You're up early. That's good. No place for laziness on a ranch." "I'm accustomed to early rising," Catherine replied, which was true enough, though in Boston it had been for morning walks or reading, not for preparing breakfast for ranch hands. "I'll show you how to manage the stove properly this morning," Mrs. Wilkins said. "Most important thing in a ranch kitchen, get the temperature wrong and you'll ruin everything." Catherine listened attentively as Mrs. Wilkins explained the vagaries of the cast iron range, so different from the modern kitchen stove in her father's Boston home. When the back door swung open, Catherine turned, expecting to see Hunter, but instead found herself facing a young man who must have been Ethan Jameson. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps only a few years older than herself, with fair hair and his father's features as described in the photographs her father had shown her. His clothes were dusty from riding and he looked tired. "You must be Miss Turner," he said, removing his hat. "I'm Ethan Jameson. Sorry I wasn't here to greet you yesterday." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Jameson," Catherine replied formally. Ethan nodded, his manner businesslike. "I trust Hunter and Mrs. Wilkins have explained your duties. My father spoke highly of your father. Said he was a shrewd businessman." The mention of her father made Catherine stiffen slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Yes, he is." Ethan seemed to notice her discomfort but chose not to comment on it. "I run things differently than my father did. I'm often away from the house, checking the herds or handling business in town. You'll mainly answer to Hunter when I'm not here." Catherine nodded her understanding, relieved that Ethan seemed to have no interest in the circumstances that had brought her west. Perhaps he didn't know the full story, or perhaps he simply didn't care, focused as he was on the ranch. "The men will be in for breakfast soon," Mrs. Wilkins announced. "Miss Turner, you can set the table while I finish these biscuits." As Catherine arranged plates and cutlery on the large table in the dining room, she heard the front door open and Hunter's voice in conversation with Ethan. Their words were too low to make out, but the tone was serious. Business matters, no doubt. When she returned to the kitchen, both men were there, Hunter pouring himself a cup of coffee. He looked up as she entered, and Catherine felt a peculiar flutter in her chest at the warmth in his blue eyes. "Morning, Miss Turner," he greeted her. "Sleep well." "Very well, thank you," she replied, aware of Mrs. Wilkins watching their interaction with narrowed eyes. "Hunter tells me you handled the journey admirably," Ethan remarked, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Wilkins. "Many Eastern ladies find the trip out here quite trying." It was. "Educational," Catherine said diplomatically, remembering the dust, the heat, and the jarring motion of the stagecoach. Hunter chuckled, a warm sound that made Catherine want to smile despite herself. "That's one way to put it." The kitchen door swung open again, and several ranch hands filed in, removing their hats and nodding respectfully to Catherine. She recognized Frank, Pete, and Caleb from the previous evening, along with two others she hadn't met. "This here's Miss Turner, our new housekeeper," Ethan announced to the newcomers. "Miss Turner, that's Diego and Tom, two more of our hands." Breakfast was a simple but substantial affair: biscuits, bacon, eggs, and strong coffee. Catherine observed the men as they ate, noting their easy camaraderie and the deference they showed to both Ethan and Hunter. Hunter, she noticed, ate with the same efficiency as the others but managed to maintain better table manners, occasionally catching her eye across the table with a look that suggested he was checking on her comfort. After breakfast, the men dispersed to their duties and Catherine began clearing the table. Mrs. Wilkins showed her the proper way to clean the cast iron pans and explained the weekly washing schedule, the rotation of meals, and where various supplies were kept. By midday, Catherine's hands were red and her back ached from unaccustomed labor, but she felt a surprising sense of accomplishment. In Boston, servants had performed these tasks invisibly. Here, the direct connection between work and result was oddly satisfying. "You learn quick," Mrs. Wilkins remarked grudgingly as they prepared a simple lunch of cold beef sandwiches and pickles for the hands who would come in from the fields. "Thought you'd be more helpless, being a city girl." Catherine took it as the compliment it was meant to be. "Thank you. I appreciate your patience in teaching me," Mrs. Wilkins grunted, but there was less hostility in her manner now. "I'll be heading back to town tomorrow. My son needs help with his children. His wife's expecting their fourth." Catherine felt a momentary panic at the thought of being left in charge so soon but pushed it aside. "I understand. I hope all goes well with your daughter-in-law." After lunch, as Catherine was sweeping the front porch, she spotted Hunter riding in with several of the hands. They herded a small group of cattle toward one of the nearer corrals, their movements coordinated with practiced ease. Catherine paused in her work to watch, fascinated by the skill with which the men and horses worked together. Hunter broke away from the group and rode toward the house, dismounting smoothly and looping his horse's reins around the hitching post. "Afternoon, Miss Turner," he greeted her, removing his hat and wiping his brow with his sleeve. "How are you finding your first day?" "Educational," Catherine repeated her assessment from breakfast, but this time with a small smile. Hunter's face broke into a grin that transformed his features from handsome to breathtaking. "Mrs. Wilkins working you hard, not harder than necessary," Catherine replied. "I have much to learn if I'm to be of use here." Hunter studied her for a moment, his expression softening. "You know, most women in your position would be complaining by now, demanding special treatment or refusing to do the work." Catherine's grip tightened on the broom handle. "I'm not most women, Mr. Lawson." "No," he agreed quietly. "You certainly are not." They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with something Catherine couldn't quite name. Then Hunter cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you might like to see more of the ranch once you're done with your chores," he offered. "I could saddle a gentle mare for you if you ride." Catherine hesitated. She didn't know how to ride. Her father had insisted on proper riding lessons for her and her sisters, but it had been in controlled environments with side saddles and formal habits. "I can ride," she said finally, "though I don't have proper riding attire with me." Hunter's eyes crinkled at the corners. "We're not so formal out here, Miss Turner. A regular dress will do fine for a gentle ride around the home pastures." Catherine found herself nodding before she'd fully considered the propriety of riding alone with a man she barely knew. "I would like that very much, Mr. Lawson." "Hunter," he corrected her. "Out here, formality only goes so far. If we're going to be working together, I'd prefer if you called me Hunter." Catherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Then you must call me Catherine." "Catherine," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "I'll come by around 4 if that suits you." "It does," she replied, suddenly eager for the afternoon's chores to be completed. As Hunter walked back toward his horse, Catherine found herself watching the confident set of his shoulders, the easy grace of his movements. He was unlike any man she had known in Boston, direct, honest, without pretense or artifice. There was a solidness to him that she found inexplicably comforting. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur of tasks as Mrs. Wilkins put her through her paces, teaching her to prepare a roast for dinner and knead dough for tomorrow's bread. By the time 4 o'clock approached, Catherine's arms ached and flour dusted her hair, but she felt a sense of accomplishment that was entirely new. "Go on, then," Mrs. Wilkins said, noticing Catherine's frequent glances at the clock. "I'll finish up here, but be back by 6 to help with dinner." Catherine thanked her and hurried upstairs to freshen up, washing her hands and face and changing into a clean dress of practical blue cotton. She brushed and repinned her hair, then chided herself for caring so much about her appearance for a simple ride around the ranch. Hunter was waiting by the corral when she emerged from the house, holding the reins of 2 horses, his own chestnut gelding and a pretty bay mare with a white blaze down her face. "This is Daisy," Hunter said, introducing the mare. "She's steady as they come, but she's got enough spirit to be interesting." Catherine approached the horse, letting Daisy sniff her hand before gently stroking the velvety nose. "She's beautiful. Need a hand up?" Hunter asked, and when Catherine nodded, he formed a stirrup with his hands to boost her onto the mare's back. Catherine arranged herself as comfortably as possible astride the western saddle, adjusting her skirts for modesty. It was different from the side saddle she was accustomed to, but not uncomfortable. Hunter mounted his own horse with practiced ease, and they set off at a walk, following a well-worn trail that led away from the ranch buildings and toward a gently rolling pasture where cattle grazed in the distance. The Rocking J runs from those mountains in the east to the river about 10 miles west, Hunter explained, pointing toward the horizon. This is good country, enough water, good grass, not too harsh in winter. As they rode, Hunter pointed out landmarks and explained the workings of the ranch where the best grazing was found, how they moved the herds seasonally, the challenges of protecting the cattle from predators and rustlers. Catherine listened attentively, asking questions that seemed to surprise and please Hunter with their thoughtfulness. The majesty of the landscape around them, so vast and open compared to the confined spaces of Boston, filled her with a sense of possibility that she hadn't felt since before her life had been upended. "May I ask you something personal, Catherine?" Hunter said as they paused atop a small rise, the ranch buildings visible in the distance. Catherine tensed slightly but nodded. "You may. What really brought you out here? I know what Ethan said, that your father sent you to work for old Mr. Jameson, but there's more to it, isn't there?" Catherine looked away, focusing on the distant mountains. For a moment, she considered deflecting the question or fabricating a more acceptable version of events, but something about Hunter's direct gaze and the vast honesty of the landscape around them made lies seem pointless. "I was involved in a scandal," she said finally, her voice steady despite the shame that still burned within her. "Or rather, a scandal was manufactured around me. A business associate of my father's made inappropriate advances. When we were discovered alone together, he claimed I had lured him there. My father chose to believe him over me." Hunter's expression darkened. "So you were innocent but punished anyway." "Yes," Catherine admitted. "My father was concerned about appearances, about how it would affect his business if his daughter was perceived as forward. So he arranged for me to come here out of sight until the gossip died down." "That's not right," Hunter said, his voice tight with anger. "A father should protect his daughter, not cast her aside to protect his reputation." Catherine was surprised by the vehemence in his tone. "You seem very certain of that." "I am," Hunter replied. "My own father was not a good man. He abandoned my mother when I was young. I learned early what a man should not be." The personal revelation touched Catherine deeply. "I'm sorry." Hunter shook his head. "Don't be. It taught me to value honesty and loyalty above all else." He looked at her directly, his blue eyes intense. "I believe you, Catherine, about what happened." Those simple words, "I believe you," broke something open inside her. No one, not even her own sisters, had expressed such unconditional faith in her version of events. "Thank you," she whispered, blinking back sudden tears. They rode in companionable silence for a while, making their way back toward the ranch as the afternoon light began to soften toward evening. "You know," Hunter said as the buildings came back into view, "sometimes what's meant as punishment turns out to be something else entirely." Catherine glanced at him questioningly. "Your father thought he was punishing you by sending you here," Hunter continued, "but I think he may have given you something instead, a chance to build a different kind of life. One where you're valued for who you are, not just for your family name or your place in society." The idea was startling in its simplicity and its appeal. Could this enforced exile actually be an opportunity? A chance to discover who she truly was, away from the stifling expectations of Boston society? "I hadn't thought of it that way," Catherine admitted. Hunter smiled, the expression warming his eyes. "Well, think on it, and know that whatever brought you here, I'm glad you came." The simple sincerity in his voice made Catherine's heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with the motion of the horse beneath her. As they rode back into the ranch yard, she found herself seeing her situation in an entirely new light, not as a victim of injustice, but as a woman being offered an unexpected chance at freedom. Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine settled into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. Each day brought new challenges, but also new discoveries about the land, the work, and herself. Mrs. Wilkins had returned to town as planned, leaving Catherine in full charge of the household, a responsibility she embraced with determination and growing confidence. Ethan Jameson remained something of an enigma, often away on ranch business or closeted in his study with account books. He was polite but distant, treating Catherine as the employee she was, neither questioning her presence nor showing particular interest in her background. Hunter, by contrast, had become a steady presence in her daily life. He took his meals at the main house, often lingering after breakfast to discuss the day's plans or stopping by the kitchen in the afternoon with some small gift, a particularly perfect wildflower, an interesting rock, once even a hawk's feather he'd found on the range. These gestures were offered casually, but the warmth in his eyes when Catherine accepted them spoke of deeper feelings neither of them had yet acknowledged. Their evening rides had become a regular occurrence, weather permitting. Hunter seemed to take pleasure in showing Catherine the beauty of the land he so clearly loved, pointing out the changing colors of the distant mountains as the sun set, or explaining the habits of the wildlife they occasionally spotted. For Catherine, these rides were a revelation not just because of the breathtaking landscape or the freedom of movement after a day of household chores, but because of the conversations they shared. Hunter spoke of his dreams for a ranch of his own someday, and Catherine found herself sharing stories of her childhood, her love of literature, and her secret ambition to one day write stories of her own. On this particular evening, nearly 3 weeks after her arrival, they rode to a small stream that cut through the eastern pasture. The cottonwood trees along its banks provided welcome shade after the heat of the day, and Hunter suggested they dismount and let the horses drink. "I have something for you," he said as they settled on a flat rock near the water's edge. From his saddlebag, he produced a small paper-wrapped package. "What's this?" Catherine asked, taking it curiously. "Open it and see," Hunter replied, a hint of nervousness in his smile. Catherine carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a small leather-bound journal and a pen in a protective case. "You mentioned wanting to write," Hunter explained when she looked up at him in surprise. "I thought you might like something to write in. I picked them up last time I was in town." Catherine ran her fingers over the smooth leather cover, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. It wasn't an expensive present, but the fact that Hunter had listened to her dreams and sought to encourage them meant more than any costly trinket. "Thank you," she said softly. "This is perfect." Hunter's smile deepened, creating those crinkles around his eyes that Catherine had come to find so endearing. "I'm glad you like it. I do, very much." Catherine looked down at the journal, then back at Hunter. "No one has ever encouraged my writing before. My father thought it a frivolous pursuit for a woman." "Your father," Hunter said carefully, "seems to have had some mistaken ideas about what makes a woman valuable." The directness of his statement startled Catherine, but she found she couldn't disagree. "I'm beginning to think you're right." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, listening to the gentle murmur of the stream and the occasional calls of birds in the trees above. "Catherine," Hunter said finally, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Catherine's heart quickened at the change in his manner. "Yes. The town's having a harvest dance this Saturday. I was wondering if you might like to attend. With me," he added, a touch of color rising to his tan cheeks, "a dance with Hunter." The prospect sent a thrill through Catherine that she hadn't felt in a long time, if ever. In Boston, dances had been formal affairs where young ladies were expected to make advantageous matches, every interaction watched and judged by the critical eyes of society. This would be something entirely different. "I would like that very much," she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. Hunter's face broke into a smile of such genuine pleasure that Catherine couldn't help but smile in return. "Good," he said. "That's good." As they remounted their horses for the ride back to the ranch, Catherine felt a lightness in her spirit that had been absent for too long. This wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself, but perhaps it was the life she needed, one where she was valued for her character rather than her family connections, where her thoughts and feelings mattered to someone who saw her clearly. The dance was 2 days away, and as Catherine prepared dinner that evening, she found herself humming softly, earning curious glances from Ethan and appreciative ones from Hunter. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt truly hopeful about what the future might hold. The day of the harvest dance dawned clear and crisp, with a hint of autumn in the air despite the lingering summer heat. Catherine moved through her morning chores with nervous energy, her mind continually drifting to the evening ahead. She had carefully pressed her best dress, a deep green silk that brought out the color of her eyes, and spent extra time arranging her hair into a simple but elegant style. At breakfast, Ethan announced that he would be accompanying them to town as he had business to discuss with several ranchers who would be at the dance. "I'll drive the wagon," he said. "We'll leave around 4 if that suits you both." Hunter nodded his agreement, catching Catherine's eye across the table with a private smile that made her cheeks warm. The day passed both too quickly and too slowly. Catherine baked bread and prepared a cold supper that the men could serve themselves later, as they wouldn't return until late. She couldn't help but notice that Hunter found more reasons than usual to pass by the house, stopping to chat briefly each time, his anticipation as evident as her own. By 4 o'clock, Catherine was ready, her dress carefully donned, her mother's small pearl earrings one of the few pieces of jewelry she'd brought West in place. She descended the stairs to find Hunter waiting in the main room, dressed in clean dark trousers, a pressed white shirt, and a vest that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his stubble to a more groomed appearance. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his eyes warm with admiration. "Thank you," Catherine replied, feeling suddenly shy. "You look very handsome yourself." The drive to town took just under an hour, with Ethan handling the reins and Hunter seated beside Catherine in the wagon bed. They spoke little, but Catherine was acutely aware of Hunter's presence beside her, of the occasional brush of his arm against hers as the wagon jolted over rough spots in the road. Cimarron was a small but growing town, with a main street lined with businesses, a general store, a bank, a hotel, and several saloons. The dance was being held in the town hall, a simple but substantial building at the end of the main street. Already, wagons and horses were gathered outside, and the sounds of a fiddle tuning up drifted through the open doors. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down, then helped Catherine descend while Hunter tied the horses to the hitching rail. "I'll leave you two to enjoy yourselves," Ethan said. "I need to speak with Bob Wilson about those cattle we're buying." As Ethan strode off toward a group of men near the entrance, Hunter offered Catherine his arm. "Shall we?" The town hall had been transformed for the occasion, with lanterns hanging from the rafters and tables along one wall laden with food brought by the townspeople. A small stage at one end held 3 musicians, a fiddler, a guitarist, and a man with a harmonica. The center of the room had been cleared for dancing, and several couples were already circling to the lively tune being played. Catherine felt a momentary panic as they entered. In Boston, she would have known the proper protocol, the expected behaviors. Here the rules were unfamiliar, the faces mostly unknown. Hunter seemed to sense her nervousness. "Don't worry," he said quietly, close to her ear. "These are good people, simple maybe compared to what you're used to, but good-hearted." His reassurance calmed her, and Catherine allowed herself to be led further into the room. Hunter introduced her to several people: the blacksmith and his wife, the general store owner, the young schoolteacher who had recently arrived from Denver. All greeted her warmly, though Catherine noticed curious glances and whispered conversations that suggested her presence at Hunter's side was generating interest. "Would you like some punch?" Hunter asked after the introductions were complete. Catherine nodded, and Hunter led her to the refreshment table where he filled 2 cups with a sweet, fruity concoction. "It's not fancy," he apologized, "but Mrs. Peterson makes it with wild berries she picks herself." Catherine took a sip and smiled. "It's delicious." The music shifted to a slower waltz, and Hunter set down his cup, offering his hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Turner?" Catherine placed her hand in his, feeling a thrill at the warm strength of his fingers closing around hers. "You may, Mr. Lawson." Hunter led her onto the dance floor and placed his hand respectfully at her waist, maintaining a proper distance between them as they began to move to the music. Catherine was surprised by his skill. He moved with a natural grace that belied his rugged appearance. "You dance very well," she remarked as he guided her through a turn. Hunter smiled. My mother insisted I learn, said no son of hers would stumble around a dance floor like a newborn colt. The image made Catherine laugh, a sound that drew Hunter's gaze to her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. You should laugh more often, he said softly. It suits you. They danced in silence for a moment, the music surrounding them, their movements in perfect harmony. Catherine was acutely aware of Hunter's hand at her waist, of the subtle scent of soap and leather that clung to him, of the way his eyes never left her face. As the waltz ended, Hunter reluctantly released her but kept her hand in his. Another, he asked as the musicians began a livelier tune. Catherine nodded, and they launched into a spirited reel that left her breathless and laughing. Dance followed dance, and Catherine found herself relaxing into the joy of the evening, the worries and sorrows of Boston receding until they seemed like memories from another life. During a break in the music, Hunter fetched them more punch and led Catherine to a quieter corner of the room where several chairs had been arranged. Having a good time? He asked, his eyes searching her face. The best, Catherine replied honestly. I can't remember when I've enjoyed myself more. Hunter's expression softened. I'm glad. You deserve some happiness, Catherine. Before she could respond, a shadow fell across them. Catherine looked up to see a well-dressed man in his 30s standing before them, his expression curious. Hunter Lawson, the man said, extending his hand. Good to see you again. Hunter stood and shook the man's hand, though Catherine noticed a certain reserve in his manner. Richard, didn't know you were back in town. Just returned from Denver yesterday, Richard replied, his gaze shifting to Catherine. Aren't you going to introduce me to your lovely companion? Hunter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Catherine Turner, Richard Barrett. Richard owns the bank here in Cimarron. Catherine nodded politely. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Barrett. The pleasure is all mine, Miss Turner, Richard replied, his smile practiced and smooth. I don't believe I've seen you in town before. Miss Turner is the housekeeper at the Rocking J, Hunter explained, his tone slightly defensive. Richard's eyebrows rose. Indeed, you seem rather refined for such a position, if you don't mind my saying so. Catherine felt Hunter stiffen beside her, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm. Not at all, Mr. Barrett. Life takes unexpected turns sometimes. I'm finding that housekeeping suits me better than I might have imagined. Richard studied her with renewed interest. I see. Well, perhaps you would honor me with the next dance, Miss Turner. I'm sure Hunter won't mind sharing your company for one dance. Before Hunter could object, Catherine responded smoothly. I'm afraid I've promised all my dances to Mr. Lawson this evening, perhaps another time. Richard's smile dimmed slightly, but he recovered quickly. Of course. Another time, enjoy your evening. As Richard walked away, Hunter looked at Catherine with a mixture of surprise and admiration. You didn't have to do that. I wouldn't have minded if you wanted to dance with him. Catherine met his gaze steadily. I would have minded. I came here with you, Hunter. There's no one else I'd rather dance with tonight. The simple honesty of her statement seemed to affect Hunter deeply. He took her hand, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. Catherine, whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by the musicians starting up again, this time with a slow, romantic melody that Catherine didn't recognize. Hunter stood, still holding her hand. One more dance, he asked, his voice husky. Catherine rose to join him. Yes. This time, as they moved onto the dance floor, Hunter held her closer than before, still entirely proper but with a new intimacy that made Catherine's heart race. They moved together as if they had been dancing partners for years, her hand in his arm around her waist, their eyes locked in a silent communication more profound than words. As the music swelled around them, Catherine realized with sudden clarity that she was falling in love with Hunter Lawson, with his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, his genuine appreciation for who she was, not who society expected her to be. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a sense of rightness, as if pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving had suddenly fallen into place. What are you thinking? Hunter asked softly, noticing the change in her expression. Catherine hesitated, knowing it was too soon to voice the depth of her feelings. I'm thinking that I'm glad my father sent me here, she said instead. Even if it was meant as punishment. Hunter's arm tightened slightly around her waist. I've been thinking the same thing. From the moment I saw you at the trading post, something told me that your arrival was going to change everything." The music drew to a close, but they remained standing close together, reluctant to break the connection between them. "Catherine," Hunter began, his voice low and intense. "I know it hasn't been long, but Hunter," Ethan's voice cut through the moment, urgent and sharp. "Hunter, we need to go, now." Hunter turned, instantly alert at the tone in Ethan's voice. "What's wrong?" Ethan strode toward them, his face tense. "Just got word from Pete. There's trouble at the ranch, fire in the north pasture." Catherine felt Hunter's body go rigid beside her. "Fire? How bad? Don't know yet," Ethan replied grimly. "Pete rode hard to bring the news. We need to get back." Hunter nodded, immediately shifting from the gentle dance partner to the capable ranch foreman. "Let's go." He turned to Catherine, apology in his eyes. "I'm sorry to cut the evening short." "Don't apologize," Catherine said quickly. "The ranch is what matters now." As they hurried from the town hall, Catherine gathered her skirts to keep pace with the men's longer strides. The romantic mood of the evening had shattered, replaced by a tense urgency that infected all three of them. Ethan untied the horses and leapt into the driver's seat of the wagon while Hunter helped Catherine up. This time, there was no lingering touch, no shared smiles, only the efficient movements of people responding to an emergency. As the wagon jolted into motion, Catherine braced herself against the seat, her mind racing with worry. Fire was perhaps the greatest threat a ranch could face, capable of destroying grazing land, killing cattle, and even threatening the ranch buildings if it spread unchecked. The drive back to the ranch seemed interminable, though Ethan pushed the horses harder than Catherine had seen before. In the darkness, she could make out a faint orange glow on the horizon, growing more distinct as they approached. How could it have started? She asked, breaking the tense silence. "Could be natural lightning from that storm that passed to the north," Hunter replied, his voice tight. "Could be accidental, a campfire not properly extinguished, or deliberate," Ethan finished grimly. "We've had trouble with the Hargrove outfit. They want our water rights." Catherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The disputes between ranchers that she had read about in penny novels suddenly took on a frightening reality. As they crested the final rise before the ranch, the full extent of the fire became visible. A substantial section of the north pasture was ablaze, the flames whipped by the wind into a dancing wall of orange and red. Ranch hands were visible as silhouettes against the fire, some on horseback driving cattle away from the flames, others working with shovels and wet blankets to create fire breaks. Ethan drove the wagon directly to the ranch house, pulling the horses to a stop in the yard. "Catherine, stay here," he instructed as he and Hunter jumped down. "We'll need water and food for the men later, but for now, stay away from the fire." Before Catherine could respond, both men were running toward the barn, where other hands were saddling horses and gathering tools. Within minutes, they had mounted and ridden toward the blaze, leaving Catherine standing alone in the yard, the distant roar of the fire filling the night. For a moment, she considered following Ethan's instructions to wait in the house. But as she watched the men fighting to save the ranch, Hunter among them, his silhouette distinctive even at a distance, Catherine knew she couldn't remain idle. Hurrying inside, she changed quickly from her dance dress into her work clothes, then filled every available container with water. Loading them onto a small hand cart from the garden, she made her way toward the fire, staying at a safe distance but close enough to provide water to the exhausted men as they rotated away from the front lines. The heat was intense, even from where she stood, and the smoke made her eyes water and her throat burn. But Catherine persisted, distributing water, tearing strips from old sheets to serve as masks against the smoke, and offering words of encouragement to the soot-streaked men who came to her station. Hours passed in a blur of smoke and flame. Catherine lost track of time, focused only on the task at hand. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of Hunter in the distance, directing men, working alongside them to dig fire breaks or beat out flames with wet blankets. Finally, near dawn, the wind shifted and began to die down. The fire, deprived of fuel by the fire breaks and battled relentlessly by the exhausted ranch hands, gradually diminished. By the time the first rays of sunlight appeared on the eastern horizon, the blaze was largely contained, though small pockets still smoldered, requiring vigilance. Catherine was refilling water containers from a barrel when she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she found Hunter standing there, his face blackened with soot, his clothes singed in places, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only concern, and beneath it, a hint of admiration. "I couldn't stay in the house while everyone else was fighting to save the ranch," Catherine replied simply. Hunter shook his head, a tired smile briefly lighting his face. "You continue to surprise me, Catherine Turner. Is it over?" she asked, offering him a dipper of water. Hunter drank deeply before answering. "Mostly, we lost about 50 acres of good grazing land and maybe a dozen head of cattle. Could have been much worse." Was it deliberate?" Catherine asked hesitantly. Hunter's expression hardened. "Looks that way." Ethan found the remains of a fire starter near where it began, too deliberate to be an accident. "The Hargroves can't prove it," Hunter said grimly. "But who else would benefit?" Catherine touched his arm gently. "What will you do?" "For now, make sure the fire's completely out, get some rest. Then Ethan will ride to the marshal in Cimarron, report what happened." Hunter ran a hand through his hair, leaving a streak of ash. "But that's for later. Right now, I need to check on the men, make sure everyone's accounted for." "Of course," Catherine said, understanding his sense of responsibility. "I'll prepare food at the house. Everyone will be hungry." Hunter caught her hand as she turned to go. "Catherine, thank you for being here. For helping." The simple sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. "This is my home now, too," she said softly. "I want to protect it as much as you do." Something shifted in Hunter's expression at her words, a softening, a realization. For a moment, it seemed he might say more, but then one of the ranch hands called his name and the moment passed. "I'll see you back at the house," Hunter said, reluctantly releasing her hand. Catherine nodded and began the walk back to the ranch house, the cart rattling behind her. Despite her exhaustion, her smoke-stained clothes, and the gravity of the night's events, she felt a curious sense of belonging. For the first time since leaving Boston, she had been truly useful, truly needed. The ranch was becoming her home in a way she hadn't anticipated, and the people here, especially Hunter, were becoming the family she had never truly had. As she reached the house and began preparing a hearty breakfast for the returning men, Catherine found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed in just a few short weeks. She had been sent west as punishment, torn from everything familiar and thrust into a world she had been woefully unprepared for. Yet somehow, in this harsh but beautiful land, among these straightforward, hardworking people, she had found something precious: purpose, respect, and perhaps even love. Whatever her father's intentions had been in sending her here, the result was turning out to be not a punishment at all, but the greatest blessing of her life. The days following the fire were filled with hard work as the ranch recovered from the damage. Fences needed repair, cattle had to be rounded up from where they had scattered during the blaze, and constant vigilance was maintained against further threats. The marshal from Cimarron had ridden out to investigate, but without witnesses or concrete evidence, there was little he could do beyond promising to have a word with the Hargrove family. Catherine threw herself into the work of supporting the ranch's recovery, rising earlier than usual to prepare substantial meals for the men working long hours in the field, and often riding out herself to deliver food and water to those too far from the house to return for meals. These brief encounters with Hunter during the day became the bright spots in her otherwise exhausting routine moments, when their eyes would meet over the rim of a canteen or their hands would brush as she passed him a wrapped sandwich. Neither of them had spoken of the moment they had shared at the dance before the fire interrupted, but Catherine felt a shift in their relationship nonetheless. There was a deeper understanding between them now, a sense of partnership forged in crisis. The stolen glances, the lingering touches, the way Hunter would seek her out at the end of each day to share the progress made all spoke of feelings growing too strong to be contained much longer. A week after the fire, as Catherine was hanging laundry in the yard, she spotted Hunter riding toward the house, his expression unusually serious. He dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, then approached her with purposeful strides. "Catherine," he said, his voice low and urgent, "can you spare a moment? There's something I need to discuss with you." Anxiety fluttered in Catherine's chest at his tone. Of course, is something wrong? Hunter glanced around as if ensuring they were alone. Not here, can you ride with me? What I have to say is private. Curious and concerned, Catherine nodded. Let me just finish hanging these sheets. I'll meet you at the corral in 15 minutes. Hunter agreed and headed toward the barn, leaving Catherine to hurriedly complete her task, her mind racing with possibilities. Had there been more trouble with the Hargroves? Was Hunter planning to leave the ranch? The thought sent a pang of distress through her that surprised her with its intensity. 15 minutes later, Catherine approached the corral to find Hunter waiting with their horses already saddled. He helped her mount Daisy with his usual careful courtesy, then swung up onto his own gelding. They rode in silence for a time, following a trail that led away from the ranch toward a small rise overlooking a peaceful valley. It was one of Catherine's favorite spots from their evening rides, with a magnificent view of the mountains in the distance and a solitary oak tree providing shade. Hunter dismounted and helped Catherine down, then tied both horses to a low branch of the oak. He seemed uncharacteristically nervous, pacing a few steps before turning to face her. Catherine, he began, then paused as if gathering his thoughts. I've been thinking a lot these past days. About the ranch, about my future, about you. Catherine's heart quickened at his words. I've been thinking about you too, she admitted softly. Hunter moved closer, taking her hands in his. The night of the fire, when you said this was your home now too, I can't tell you what that meant to me. You came here as a stranger, sent against your will, and yet you've embraced this life, this place, with a courage and grace that amazes me every day. Catherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks at his praise. This place has given me more than I ever expected. It's given me freedom, purpose. She hesitated, then added in a whisper, and you. Hunter's hands tightened around hers. Catherine, I know it hasn't been long, and maybe this is too soon, but life out here has taught me not to wait when something matters, and you matter to me, more than anything or anyone ever has. He took a deep breath, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I love you, Catherine. I think I've loved you since that first day at the trading post when you stood there looking terrified but determined to face whatever came next. I love your courage, your kindness, your strength. I love the way you've made a place for yourself here, not by changing who you are, but by bringing all that you are to this new life. Catherine felt tears welling in her eyes, but they were tears of joy. I love you too, Hunter, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion flooding through her. I never expected to find love here of all places, but I can't imagine my life without you now. Hunter's face transformed with a smile of such pure happiness that Catherine felt her heart might burst. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise. When they parted, Hunter didn't release her, instead drawing her closer in a warm embrace. There's more I need to tell you, he said, his voice rumbling against her ear where her head rested against his chest. Catherine looked up at him, curious. What is it? Hunter led her to a flat rock beneath the oak tree where they could sit side by side, his arms still around her shoulders. You know I've been saving to buy my own ranch someday, Catherine nodded. Hunter had spoken of this dream during their evening rides. Well, there's a property that's come available, the old Wilson place, about 20 miles north of here. It's smaller than the Rocking J, but it's good land with a solid house and dependable water. Bob Wilson's moving to Colorado to be near his daughter, and he's offering it at a fair price. Catherine felt a mixture of emotions at this news, happiness for Hunter that his dream might be within reach, but also concern about what it would mean for them if he left the Rocking J. That's wonderful news, she said sincerely. Is it? Is it something you can afford? Hunter nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. I've been saving every penny for 10 years. I have enough for the down payment, and Wilson's willing to carry the note for the rest. It would be a stretch at first, but with hard work I could make it pay. I'm so happy for you, Catherine said, though she couldn't quite keep the hint of sadness from her voice. Hunter turned to face her directly, taking both her hands in his. Catherine, I'm not telling you this because I'm planning to leave you behind. I'm telling you because I want you to come with me, as my wife. The words hung in the air between them, momentous and transformative. Catherine stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Your wife, she whispered. Hunter nodded, his expression both hopeful and vulnerable. I know it's sudden. I know we come from different worlds. You were raised with luxury and refinement, and I'm offering you a life of hard work on a struggling ranch. It's not what someone like you would have expected." Catherine silenced him by placing her fingers gently against his lips. "Hunter Lawson, do you really think I care about luxury and refinement? These past weeks have taught me what truly matters in life: honesty, integrity, hard work, and love. You've shown me all of those things. You've really seen me in a way no one in Boston ever did." She took a deep breath, her heart so full it seemed it might overflow. "Yes, I will marry you. I will go with you to your ranch, and together we'll build something beautiful. I can think of no greater happiness than to be your wife." The joy that spread across Hunter's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, radiant and transformative. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object which he held out to her. "It's not much," he said almost apologetically. "Not like the fancy rings ladies wear in Boston. But it was my mother's, and she always said it should go to the woman I loved." The ring was a simple silver band with a small, perfect pearl set in the center. Catherine held out her trembling hand, and Hunter slipped it onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her. "It's the most beautiful ring I've ever seen," she said truthfully, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll treasure it always." Hunter gathered her into his arms again, his kiss deeper this time, filled with the promise of their shared future. When they finally parted, both breathless, Catherine rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "When should we tell Ethan?" she asked after a moment. Hunter sighed. "Tonight, I suppose. He'll be disappointed to lose both his foreman and his housekeeper at once, but he's a good man. He'll understand." "And when would the wedding be?" Catherine asked, the reality of their engagement beginning to sink in. Hunter smiled down at her. "As soon as you like. There's a preacher who comes through Cimarron every other Sunday, or we could ride to Santa Fe if you want something more formal." Catherine considered this. In Boston, weddings were elaborate affairs planned months in advance, with engraved invitations and lavish receptions. But that life seemed distant now, like a story she had read rather than lived. The preacher in Cimarron would be perfect, she decided. "I don't want to wait any longer than necessary to begin our life together." Hunter's arms tightened around her. "Nor do I. And Catherine, I promise you this: whatever life brings us, whatever challenges we face, you will never regret choosing this path. I will spend every day making sure of that." As they rode back to the ranch, side by side in the golden afternoon light, Catherine felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. The path that had brought her here had been paved with injustice and pain, but it had led her to a love and a life more authentic and fulfilling than anything she could have found in Boston's drawing rooms. Her father had sent her west as punishment, believing he was teaching her a harsh lesson about the consequences of defying society's expectations. Instead, he had unwittingly given her the greatest gift imaginable: the freedom to discover her true self, and the chance to build a life with a man who loved her for exactly who she was. That evening, after they had shared their news with a surprised but genuinely pleased Ethan, Catherine sat at the small desk in her room, the journal Hunter had given her open before her. Dipping her pen in ink, she began to write, the words flowing easily. "I came to this wild land in chains of obligation and shame, sent as punishment for a crime I did not commit. But in this vast, untamed country, I have found what I never knew I was seeking: a home for my heart, a purpose for my hands, and a love that sees me truly. What was meant to break me has instead set me free. For in the eyes of a good man, I am not a burden to be borne, but a blessing beyond measure." 3 weeks later, on a crisp October morning, Catherine stood in the small church in Cimarron, her hands trembling slightly as Hunter slipped a simple gold band onto her finger to join her mother's pearl ring. The ceremony was modest: just Ethan, a few of the ranch hands, Mrs. Wilkins, and some townspeople who had come to know and respect both Hunter and Catherine in their short time together. Catherine wore a new dress of pale blue silk that Hunter had insisted on buying for her, despite her protests that it was an unnecessary expense. "My wife will have a proper wedding dress," he had declared with a stubbornness that matched her own. As they spoke their vows, Catherine's heart was so full it seemed impossible that it could contain such happiness. Hunter's voice was steady and sure as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her for all the days of their lives, his blue eyes never leaving hers. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Hunter's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The small congregation erupted in cheers and well wishes, and as they walked back down the aisle, Catherine on Hunter's arm, she caught a glimpse of their reflection in the church's small window, no longer the frightened Boston society girl and the wary ranch foreman, but partners, equals, bound by love and common purpose. The wedding celebration continued at the hotel restaurant, where Ethan had arranged for a modest but festive meal. As glasses were raised in toast after toast, Catherine found herself studying the faces around her people who had been strangers just months ago but who now felt like family. "Happy Mrs. Lawson," Hunter murmured in her ear, his arm warm around her waist. The new name sent a thrill through her. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied honestly. Later that afternoon, they set out for their new home, the former Wilson Ranch that would now be the Lawson Ranch. Hunter had spent every spare moment of the past weeks preparing the house, making repairs, and moving his few possessions. Catherine's trunks and the wedding gifts from their friends had been sent ahead the previous day. As they crested the final rise and the ranch came into view, Hunter drew the wagon to a halt. Below them lay a picturesque valley, smaller than the rocking J but no less beautiful, with a sturdy log house nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, a barn and corral and pastures where a small herd of cattle grazed peacefully. "It's not much yet," Hunter said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "But with time and hard work, it's perfect," Catherine interrupted, her eyes taking in what would be their home, their future. "Absolutely perfect." Relief and joy spread across Hunter's face. He reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Welcome home, Catherine." The sun was setting as Hunter carried Catherine across the threshold of their new home, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture. Inside, the house was simple but well built, with a main room centered around a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a good stove, and 2 bedrooms upstairs. Hunter had arranged Catherine's books on shelves he had built himself, placed her writing desk near the best window for light, and filled a small vase with wildflowers that stood on the kitchen table. These thoughtful touches brought tears to Catherine's eyes. "You've thought of everything," she said, turning to embrace her husband. "I wanted it to feel like home for you from the first moment," Hunter replied, holding her close. "Our home, Catherine, the beginning of our story together." As night fell, they stood on the porch of their new home, Hunter's arm around Catherine's shoulders as they gazed up at the vast canopy of stars spanning the New Mexico sky. The future stretched before them, challenging, certainly, but rich with promise and possibility. "I never thanked my father," Catherine said suddenly. Hunter looked down at her, surprised. "For what?" Catherine smiled, leaning into his embrace. "For sending me here. He thought he was punishing me, but he gave me the greatest gift. Instead, he gave me you, this life, this freedom." Hunter's arms tightened around her. "Then I should thank him too, though I doubt he intended to provide a wife for a simple rancher like me." "No," Catherine agreed with a small laugh. "That was certainly not his plan." "His loss," Hunter said softly, "and my incredible gain." As they stood together in the quiet of their first evening as husband and wife, Catherine reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her to this moment. From the rigid constraints of Boston society to the vast freedom of the New Mexico territory, from a daughter dismissed and discarded to a woman cherished and respected, from punishment to blessing beyond measure. "What are you thinking?" Hunter asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Catherine turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best ones, that sometimes what looks like an ending is really a beginning. And that I wouldn't change a single step of the journey that brought me to you." Hunter's kiss was tender and deep, a physical expression of the love that bound them together. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, he took her hand and led her back inside, closing the door on the vast night sky and the world beyond. In the warmth of their new home, in the circle of each other's arms, Catherine and Hunter began the first chapter of their life together, a life built on love, respect, and the shared understanding that the greatest blessings often come disguised as our greatest challenges. 15 years later, Catherine Lawson stood on the porch of the ranch house, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun as she watched the approaching riders. Her heart lifted at the sight of Hunter in the lead, still sitting tall and straight in the saddle despite the years of hard work that had added a few streaks of silver to his dark hair. Beside him rode their eldest son, Henry, 12 years old and already showing his father's skill with horses and cattle. "They're back, Mama," 8-year-old Charlotte called excitedly, rushing out to join her mother on the porch. Behind her came 4-year-old James, his small boots clomping loudly on the wooden boards. "I see them, sweetheart," Catherine replied, smiling at her daughter's enthusiasm. "They're bringing the new horses from the auction." The Lawson Ranch had prospered over the years, growing from its modest beginnings to one of the most respected spreads in the territory. Through drought and harsh winters, through the challenges of raising a family far from towns and schools, Catherine and Hunter had built a life together that exceeded even their most hopeful dreams. Catherine's writing, begun in that small journal Hunter had given her so long ago, had blossomed as well. Her stories of frontier life, published first in local newspapers and then in magazines back east, had gained a following that surprised and delighted her. The income from her writing had helped during lean years, and the satisfaction of seeing her words in print had added another dimension to her already full life. As the riders drew closer, Catherine's family gathered around her, Charlotte and James vibrating with excitement, and 11-year-old Margaret emerging from the house with flour on her hands from helping to prepare dinner. Catherine's heart swelled with love for them all, these precious children who combined Hunter's strength and her own determination in various measures. Hunter dismounted in the yard and lifted James high in the air, the boys' delighted laughter ringing out across the ranch. Henry proudly showed his sisters the new horses, explaining with youthful expertise the fine points of each animal. When Hunter finally made his way to the porch, his smile was as warm and genuine as it had been the day they met. "Miss me?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners in that way that still made Catherine's heart skip. "Always," she replied honestly, stepping into his embrace. Despite the years and the children and the daily intimacy of ranch life, the connection between them remained as powerful as ever, a steady flame that had weathered every storm. Later that evening, after the children were in bed and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Catherine and Hunter sat together on the porch swing, a quilt shared across their laps against the autumn chill. The stars spread above them in a glittering canopy, the same stars they had gazed upon on their first night in this home. "I had a letter from Boston today," Catherine said, resting her head against Hunter's shoulder. "My sister Elizabeth writes that my father is ill. The doctors don't think he has long." Hunter's arm tightened around her. "I'm sorry, Catherine. Will you go to him?" Catherine sighed, conflicted emotions stirring within her. Her father had never acknowledged her marriage, never responded to the letters she had sent announcing the births of her children. The breach between them had remained unhealed across the years. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me feels I should go, try one last time to make peace. But another part—" She trailed off, unable to fully articulate the mix of hurt and anger that still lingered. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you," Hunter said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We could all go. The children should see the East at least once, and Henry's old enough to help manage things here for a short time." Catherine considered this possibility, trying to imagine her rancher husband and frontier children navigating the formal drawing rooms of Boston society. The image brought a smile to her lips. "Perhaps," she said, "I'll think about it." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, the gentle creaking of the swing the only sound besides the distant calling of a night bird. "Do you ever regret it?" Hunter asked suddenly. "Coming west, marrying me, choosing this life?" Catherine lifted her head to look at him, surprised by the question after all these years. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Why would you ask such a thing?" Hunter's expression was thoughtful, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Just thinking about your father, about Boston, about the life you might have had if you'd stayed." Catherine took his face between her hands, making sure he met her gaze. "Hunter Lawson, listen to me. The life I would have had in Boston would have been a cage, gilded perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. Here, with you, I have found freedom, purpose, and a love so deep it still takes my breath away. You and our children are the greatest blessings of my life." The doubt in Hunter's eyes faded, replaced by the warm certainty that had sustained them through 15 years of marriage. "And you are mine," he said softly, drawing her close for a kiss that held all the tenderness of their first embrace and all the depth of their years together. As they made their way inside, hand in hand, Catherine reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought her west. Her father had sent her as punishment, believing he was teaching her the consequences of defiance. Instead, he had unwittingly opened the door to a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have found in Boston's restrictive society. And Hunter dear, steadfast Hunter had looked at the frightened, displaced young woman from the East and had seen not a burden to be borne but a blessing beyond measure. In his eyes she had found her true reflection, and in his love she had found her true home. Whatever the future held, whether reconciliation with her father or not, whether further success with her writing or new challenges on the ranch, Catherine knew that the foundation she and Hunter had built would stand firm. Their love, tested by time and strengthened by shared struggle and joy, was as vast and enduring as the New Mexico sky above them, and as rich and nurturing as the land that had brought them together. What had begun as punishment had become the greatest blessing of her life. And for that unexpected gift, Catherine would be forever grateful.